Hello, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and you're watching episode 22 of Rules Roundup, the series where I go over questions that were asked in the unofficial global FFTCG Discord server and go over the answers to those questions, as well as diving into the rules and the reasons behind those answers so that you can both get the answers to the questions, but also check yourself as far as your own knowledge of the reasons behind those answers and your ability to explain those answers to other people if you needed to. So a way to both educate, I can say that word, educate and check your knowledge. Since this is still relatively a new relaunch of my setup here, as a reminder, if you're wondering, what is the unofficial global FFTCG Discord and where is it? It's right here. It's right there. That's what it is. And a little further to the right, I can't point that far, is an invite link for it. So if you're not in there already, go ahead and join and get yourself in there. And then you can see where all these questions are and all the discussion around it. But anyway, that's where these questions are coming from. Before we get to the questions, a couple quick notes here. It's pretty busy times right now for me personally, but I guess not just for me, but for anybody who's preparing for the 2025 Nationals here in North America, because that's coming up next week. It starts a week from Saturday, and the last chance qualifier is a week from tomorrow, at the time that I'm recording this, which is Thursday. By the time you're watching this, it's a week away if you're watching it on Friday. So we're a week away from both the last chance qualifier and nationals. So I know a lot of people are practicing and kind of figuring out what decks are going to play for either or both of those events there. But if you haven't been watching everything I've been putting out, because either you're busy or you don't know, or you just don't like me enough to watch all my content. I don't know. Anyway, I've put out a couple things in the last week that you can also check out, which is that earlier this week, I put out a video because a super exciting thing happened, which is that one of the side events at Nationals on the second day, on the Sunday, is the return of the Wolves Den. And so I did a video that came out earlier this week explaining just a little bit what the Wolves Den is. I do actually have a completely separate video from earlier this year that dives into what all the Wolves Den is. But in the video I put out earlier this week, it recaps what the Wolves Den is and also gives you the list of achievements, which is very important if you want to try to win prizes and get those achievements at the Wolves Den. So if you haven't watched that, you can go check that out after this video to see all about the Wolves Den at Nationals as a side event this year. And then last week, I put out the first video of a new series called Judge, which was getting into the type of judge calls that I got at the Portland Materia Cup last month. So similar in concept to what we go over here in Rules Roundup, but literally taking questions that popped up at a Materia Cup and both going over them, but also showing kind of cards on a field to give you the idea of what things look like visually as far as the cards in play and the interactions and all of that. So I'm calling it like the cousin of Rules Roundup, but I did that and that came out last week. So if you haven't watched that yet, you can also check that out. So a couple different things there that are a little bit different than the normal kind of steady Rules Roundup that I've been putting out for a while. So a couple options there if you haven't checked those out yet. But for this week, despite the fact it's been a couple weeks since I did a Rules Roundup, things have been pretty light as far as rules questions. Or I should say, as far as rules questions that were given their own threads and topics within the Discord. There's a lot of questions that have popped up in kind of the general rules channel, but the ones that I cover here are the ones that people make their own separate posts for and tend to be maybe a little bit more complicated sometimes. So that being said, there's 6 questions to go over today, which might not seem like that much, but there's some pretty important and interesting topics, some of which I haven't covered before. And if you stick around for the last one today is a bit wild. There's a whole lot going on there. So stick around to the end to see kind of the really in-depth one that we got going on. Anyway, I've blabbed on long enough. It's just about 5 minutes in. So let's get to some questions, since we only have 6 of them anyway. All right, here we go. Bam, first one. When a card says you may search for one card and add it to your hand, do you have to announce the card you want to search for before searching? Or can the player go through their deck and decide which card they want to go to their hand and then shuffle? They used Shinryu here as an example, who is a great example, and you'll see why in a little bit. But what this question gets to is just the basics of how search works. And, you know, if you've played for just a couple minutes at least, you probably know the basics of search, right? The basics are you play the card that has a search effect and it tells you what to search for, and you just pick up your deck and you grab the card out, you shuffle it, and you continue about your day. And that's a very bird's eye view of search. And so with this question here, we're getting into the weeds a little bit on how search works and some of the details around it, which maybe you're not familiar with. So for the purpose of this question, all we need to know about Shinryu is that Shinryu has an auto ability that says when Shinryu enters the field, you may search for one card and add it to your hand. That's as generic of a search as you're ever going to see. It just says search for one card and add it to your hand. Great. Now, as far as searching, they're asking here about what the process is of deciding what card you're searching for and whether or not you have to state ahead of time what you're searching for. So it is important to note that when this ability goes on the stack, all that's going to happen is that it goes on the stack. So definitely we're not announcing anything at that point as far as what we're searching for, which is good because your opponent doesn't get like the advance notice to know if they want to try to counter that. So then when it resolves, you know, you're going to go through the process of picking up your deck and doing that, but they're saying, hey, do I have to say first what I'm searching for or not? And to answer that, in the rules, the thing about search is that it gives you the exact instructions of the exact sequence of events. And it says when you search to pick up your deck, select a card, reveal it, shuffle your deck, you know, and then you'll have your opponent cut. And then after that, take the revealed card and then put it wherever the effect said to put it at that point. So, in essence, if you think of it in a certain way, you don't actually ever have to announce what you're searching for. You're announcing it by revealing it, by pulling it out of your deck and plopping it down, and you can just point at it. You don't even announce anything. So that is to say that you definitely do not have to say ahead of time what it is that you're searching for. Now, at the point that you're resolving this anyway, there's no opportunity for them to respond to it. But this is important because if you thought that you needed to announce it ahead of time, you might think, oh man, I have to say what I'm going to search for before I've even looked in my deck to look through the options of what I have, or maybe I've forgotten, you know, if I still have a copy of something left in there. I forgot how many copies in this deck I run, things like that. So the good news is you're not locked in. If you have a card that says like search for a job Cyan of the Seventh Dawn, you don't have to say I'm searching for Opus 19 Y'shtola, right? You don't have to like lock yourself in and then pick up your deck, and then you better have an Opus 19 Y'shtola, otherwise you're hosed. So yeah, you don't have to announce it. All you're doing is that when the search happens, you're picking it up, you're going through, and at that point you get to look through your whole deck, and then you can decide from whatever the valid choices are, which one you're going to pick. You reveal it, you do the rest of those steps that I mentioned there. Now, since we're talking about search in general, we'll just kind of cover all the bases. You're almost always allowed to fail to find. I'm going to come back to that. Fail to find means that you can pick up your deck and say, you know what? I'm failing to find one of the search targets in there. And at that point, you don't reveal anything. You shuffle the deck, have them cut, and then you just continue without having searched for a card. And if you're wondering why this might happen, it could happen because maybe you went to resolve the search and you forgot that all of your targets are no longer in the deck, and so there's literally no card in there. It could be because you just wanted to shuffle your deck and you don't actually want to do the search, but you maybe because of cards that have specific placement, you know where they are, maybe you want to shuffle things up, but you don't want to search. There's niche situations where it comes up. However, This is why Shinryu is a great example for this, is because there is a little niche rule about search that I think is worth pointing out, which is that there are very few cards in the game right now that have a search that searches for anything. The most known, most popular ones are Shinryu and Thordin. The other ones off the top of my head that can search for any card is, there's also, oh man, I just had it in my head and then I lost it as soon as I started talking. Lean, the ice backup Lean. If your opponent has, I think it's 0 or 1 cards in their hand, then you can search for any card. And then I want to say Varus, also an ice backup, is the other one I think that searches for any card, as long as you paid for Varus with at least 3 different elements when you paid for the cost to cast Varus. So very few cards in the game can search for any card, but they are important because they have a distinction, which is that you might think with a card that can search anything like this, you might think, hey, I don't really have to reveal the card, right? Because, if I'm searching for a Scion of the Seventh Dawn, I have to reveal the card just to prove I'm not cheating. I didn't grab a Clive instead or something, right? So yeah, I'm revealing this is what I searched for. And sometimes people do ask for something like Shinryu. They're like, do I have to reveal the card? Because it just says search for 1 card. Like, obviously, if I pick something, it's a card, and I don't have to prove that I picked something that meets the criteria because it's a card. I've proved it. However, the thing here is that although we definitely need that in the rules to make sure you're not cheating, that's not the only reason why we reveal. We reveal because that's what the rules say you're supposed to do. The rules instruct you that when you search, part of the process is that you reveal the card that you searched for. So it doesn't even say, oh, you're doing it for this reason. It just says that's what you do. That is the process. So even when you're searching for any card, you do have to reveal what the card is that you searched for. The other reason why this is good for Shinryu to be an example here is that I mentioned failing to find, and the reason you're allowed to fail to find is because the deck is a hidden zone, right? And a hidden zone means that your opponent doesn't get to see what's in it at any point in time. So because of that, they have no way of verifying things. So it's a hidden zone. If you say something's not in there, we can't prove otherwise. It's hidden. And so even if there was a card in there that was a valid target, you're allowed to just say, failed to find because it's a hidden zone. That does get a little bit silly when you think about things like, let's say you had a card that was returned to the bottom of the deck or something, and so both players do know for sure that a card is in there. That, like, let's say we played the 1 CP Joshua that puts a dominant or an icon on the bottom of your deck from your break zone. Now let's say that we put in a Freet on the bottom of the deck, and then we cast Elwyn that searches for a fire forward, and it's like, okay, we know there's a fire forward in the deck, we know there's an Efreet in there, but you're still allowed to fail to find if you want to, just because it's a hidden zone. So even though in real life we know that there's definitely a search target in there, because of the way the rules work, you're not required to do that. However, with these cards that can search for anything, you are required to take a card if you do the search. It's a little bit wild, and it was definitely a shock when this ruling came up. I want to say it was 2 years ago at Nationals, because it was, I want to say it had been explicitly ruled the other way on Twitter before. But for this one, at Nationals, somebody went and they played, I believe it was Shinryu. They played Shinryu. They took their deck. They went through. They went, oh, I failed to find, shuffled, and then at some point judges got involved. Maybe the opponent asked because they're like, wait a second, like they can search for anything, is it, And so it came up that that they were trying to fail to find, and Hobby Japan at the time went, oh no, if the card says it searches for any card and you do the search, you're required to take a card. And again, everybody went, huh? Because they'd ruled it otherwise. And then at a later point after that tournament, they went ahead and updated the rules to change it, to basically overturn their previous Twitter ruling, but they added it into the rules to say, hey, if you have an effect that searches for any card and you do the search, you are required to take a card. You cannot fail to find. That being said, if you read Shinryu carefully, it says when Shinryu enters the field, you may search for one card and add it to your hand. So this doesn't mean that if you search with Shinryu that you are required to search. But what it does mean is that if you play Shinryu and you go to resolve the search, if you pick up your deck and start looking through it, you are now required to take a card, right? The may means that you can just decline to search at all, right? You don't do the effect at all. You just go, you know what? I'm not searching. We're moving on. But if you start the process of searching, if you pick up your deck, now you are locked in. You must take a card. And just in case you're wondering, why would I not take a card, especially when I get any of them? Maybe it's late in the game and maybe you're close to decking out and you're like, you know what? I need to keep a card in there because I'm that close to decking out, right? So in that scenario, if you had picked up your deck and then said, oh, I'm going to fail to find, well, no, you can't. Not anymore. You have to take a card now. So it's a interesting niche ruling, but it's good to be aware of, both for yourself and for your opponent potentially. And yeah, that ended up being a much longer discussion on search than I was planning on, but there, for being like a relatively straightforward mechanic, there's some interesting things about that there. So to circle back to the original questions here, do you have to announce the card you want to add to your hand before searching? Nope. In fact, you never have to announce it. All you have to do is reveal it once you've pulled it out. And then can they go through their deck and decide what card they want to put in the hand and then shuffle? Absolutely. That's the way you're supposed to do it. All right. Next question. If I control Noctis and play Gladiolus into the field, does it deal 9,000 or 11,000 damage? AKA, does the damage count as Gladiolus dealing damage to a forward, or is it coming from Noctis since it's his ability? So what we have here is Noctis has an auto ability, which says when a wind or earth forward other than Noctis enters your field, choose one forward opponent controls. The forward that entered the field deals damage equal to its power to the chosen forward. This effect will trigger only once per turn. That last part is not really important here. And then Gladiolus has a field ability that says if Gladiolus deals damage to a forward, the damage increases by 2,000 instead. So that's the two things we're zooming in on for this question. So the question is, the question is, we've got Noctis in play. Maybe we searched the Gladiolus, and now we're casting the Gladiolus, and we're targeting something that the opponent has. How much damage is Gladiolus going to deal? Because he's supposed to deal damage equal to his power, so that's 9,000. Assuming we're not at damage 3, I guess. 9,000. But we get into the question of sources here, because if the source of the damage is Gladiolus, then his field ability should be adding 2,000 to it. If the source of the damage is Noctis, then it's Noctis dealing the damage and not Gladiolus, and that means that it would just be the 9,000. So to understand this, I kind of mentioned a little bit already that we have to look at what the source of the damage is. And this comes down to this type of effect, which is effects that use the phrasing that say a forward or forwards deal damage equal to their power to, and then whatever the target is. Because sometimes it's one way like this, and sometimes it's two way, like the Hecatonk here summon, where, or even the Fire Eject, the 6 CP Fire Eject, where you have both the forwards dealing their damage equal to their power to each other. So the thing here is that there's no official terminology in the rules for what this type of effect is, but we do see it a lot on like the cards I just mentioned. Other games, I want to say Magic calls it fight damage or something like that, because you're having forwards directly fighting each other. There's no such terminology here. We don't want to call it like battle damage or battle or something, because there actually is that terminology based around attacks and blocks and all that. If you want like a colloquial name for it, the one that I prefer is calling it command damage. And the only reason why is because when asked about these type of abilities on Twitter, Kageyama / Square / Hobby Japan in the past have referred to those type of effects as saying that the effect commands a forward to deal damage. So when it's resolving, it's commanding this forward or these forwards to deal damage equal to their power to each other. So, you know, I might refer to it as command damage, but there's nothing in the rules that's ever going to use that phrase. So don't latch onto it too much. But if you feel the desperate need, like I need a name for this, what is this type of effect? It's the closest thing we're going to get to official. But anyway, the key here in understanding whether it's Noctis dealing the damage or whether it's Gladiolus dealing the damage is in the wording, to be honest. So it says the forward that entered the field deals damage. Right? I could just stop right there on the sentence. The forward that entered the field deals damage. That's your answer right there. And then there's the variable. And the variable here is equal to its power, and then the target to the chosen forward. But that first bit tells you everything you need to know. It tells you that it is the forward, not Noctis, who's dealing damage, because this effect is commanding Gladiolus, saying you deal damage to that guy over there, or girl, or thing, or non-binary person, whatever our target is, deal damage to them. So yeah, even though it's Noctis's ability, the ability is commanding a different card to deal damage, and because of that, that's where Gladiolus's field ability comes in. He's the source of the damage, so now it's going to increase by 2,000, so it's going to be 11,000 damage. But yeah, just in general, anytime you see these effects that say the forward or the chosen forwards or whatever deal damage equal to their power, that's telling you that that's them dealing the damage. It's not, the source is not Noctis. There are other abilities that are worded very similarly, to be clear. The one that always comes to mind for me, even though it's super old school and most people probably aren't even familiar with this card, is Opus XXVI Warrior of Light. Has a special ability called Bitter End, and Bitter End, you choose a forward and then you deal it damage equal to Warrior of Light's power. And in that case, the source is still Warrior of Light, but it's not one of these like command damage or command abilities or whatever, because it's the ability dealing the damage, not the forward directly. I won't linger on that too much right now, but I'm sure eventually somebody will ask a question about that. So yeah, what we need to know here is just that the source is Gladiolus, and Noctis is just like, he's directing things. He's you go punch, and Gladiolus is like, sure. So that being said, I guess one thing I will point out before moving on here is, since Noctis is commanding Gladiolus to deal the damage, and that all happens on resolution, that means after the ability has gone on the stack and you've chosen the target that Gladiolus is going to hit, if the opponent finds a way to remove Gladiolus from the field, or just to lower his power, to be honest, then that's going to affect how this resolves. If Gladiolus is no longer on the field when Noctis's ability resolves, Gladiolus deals no damage, because what will happen is that Noctis will point at Gladiolus and go, you're not here. You're not here to deal damage. Okay. Guess we're done there. So yeah, the commanding part doesn't happen until resolution, but we've locked in already kind of the target and the fact that it was triggered from Gladiolus. So anyway, that's the counterplay there. Next question is about Ardyn. We're going to keep on theme here. We're going to move from Noctis and Gladiolus to Ardyn. Nice little segue. So here, it says, I'm trying to understand the ruling for Opus 26 regarding Ardyn's ability. The fact states, you do not take damage if Ardyn is removed from the game and not present on the field before his action ability is resolved. I want to know if removed from the game is the only condition that prevents me from taking damage. Specifically, if Ardyn is moved from the break or to the break zone, for example, by his first action ability going on the stack, does that also count as not present on the field and prevent the damage? Now, he's a newer card, hasn't seen a lot of play yet, so let's go over what he's got going on here to understand the question. So, he has, at all points, he has this action ability. It just says put himself into the break zone, choose a forward opponent controls, it loses 8,000 power. But then at damage 5, he gains an action ability, costs 0 CP, and it says play Ardyn onto the field. When Ardyn enters the field, Ardyn deals you 1 point of damage. You can only use this ability during your main phase and if Ardyn is in the break zone. All right, so it's an action ability you can use when Ardyn's in the break zone that will play him onto the field. So the way you'd expect it to play out, assuming no complications, just the card doing what it says on it, He's in your break zone, you're at damage 5, you use the action ability, you play him onto the field. And then in resolving that playing him onto the field, this action ability creates an auto ability. The auto ability says, when Ardyn enters the field, Ardyn deals you 1 point of damage. All right, so he enters the field, and then when we resolve that, we also have now created this auto ability, goes on the stack, it's going to deal you 1 damage. And then when that resolves, it deals you 1 damage. And then at that point, you have Ardyn again, whether you just keep him out as he is or you use his action ability to put him back in the break zone. You do what you want to do here with Ardyn. So the question here is about the FAQ entry, and this is the way that it's worded here is exactly the word for word the exact quote from the FAQ. Says you do not take damage if Ardyn is removed from the game and not present on the field before the action ability is resolved. So the confusion here is partially in their wording of it, to be honest. It's partially because they really could have worded this better. They didn't need to say specifically if he's removed from the game. And it makes sense in terms of that, like, if you use the action ability doesn't actually play him to the field until it resolves, right? So you say, okay, I'm using the action ability, it's on the stack, and then you pass priority. And at that point, your opponent can do something if they want to. So if they want to, they could miss Dragon, or they could use the Edward backup or something that will take the Ardyn and remove it from the game before the action ability resolves. And if that happens, when the action ability goes to resolve, it tries to play Ardyn to the field, but it can't because the action ability is looking for Ardyn in the break zone, and he's not in the break zone anymore. So then the action ability will fail to play him, and since it failed to play him, part of the action ability is the when Ardyn enters the field. It's got that little auto that's kind of tucked in there, but Ardyn didn't enter the field. So the FAQ entry is just pointing out to you that if his action ability fails to play him, you're not going to trigger the auto ability that triggers from him entering the field. So that's what that's in there for, is to explain to you that, if it doesn't play him, you don't take a point of damage. That being said, because they worded it specifically as if he's removed from the game, it makes it sound like, oh, it's only if he's removed from the game. And the person asking this question clearly seems to think that maybe it's related to what happens when Ardyn is on, when he's already been played to the field. And then maybe they're looking at, okay, got played to the field, and then the auto ability went on the stack, but now I'm going to break him with his own ability so he's not on the field when the auto resolves. And when the auto resolves, does that mean it doesn't deal a point of damage because I got rid of Ardyn before it resolved? And if you caught my phrasing and how I said that, you'll notice that I was talking about the auto ability, not the action ability, but the auto ability. So the auto ability is generated from the action ability, but the action ability itself, once you've played Ardyn to the field and you've generated that auto ability, the action ability is done. You have finished resolving it. So this entry here is talking about what happens when the action ability resolves, not the auto ability, but when the action ability resolves. So it doesn't really matter if Ardyn was removed from the game from the break zone. It could also be that maybe he was returned to the deck for some weird reason. So then that's why he's not in the break zone. Maybe he was returned to your hand for some reason. Like a really dumb play, if you're the person who controls Ardyn, is like you use Ardyn's ability and then in response you Cu Sith him back to your hand, right? And then okay, you Cu Sith them. Okay, actually here's a not so weird situation. You use the action ability, they miss Dragon, and then I guess you Cu Sith. Maybe you do that. But to be honest, there's no limitation on his zero ability. So I guess if you strategically, if they miss Dragon in response, you could always just use the action ability again. And then like you can kind of always win stack chicken with this Ardyn, which is funny. But anyway, the whole point here is the fact that he only deals the point of damage if he's actually played to the field by that effect. So even though you can use this action ability like as many times as you want because it doesn't have a limit of how many times per turn, if you used it 5 times, for example, and there's 5 versions of it on the stack, and the first one plays Ardyn to the field, and then does you point damage, and you go to resolve the other 4. Well, the other 4 are not going to play Ardyn to the field. He's already on the field, and even if for some reason he was back in the break zone, it's not going to play him to the field even still, because he's at that point a different instance of Ardyn than the one that activated the action ability in the first place. So the other 4, each one of them will just like fail to play into the field, and each one of those will not deal you a point of damage. Each one of those will, because they didn't play him, they're not dealing a point of damage. So anyway, very in-depth discussion as to how Ardyn works. And funny thing about that is that since we're talking about Ardyn, and since we're specifically talking about the FAQ entry, you know what time it is? Oh, you know what time it is? Yeah, it's shameless plug time. Why is it shameless plug time? Because I did a video all about the FAQ entries for Opus 26 called Fact Checking. Right there, Fact Checking. I went over every individual card on the FAQs for Opus 26, including Ardyn. I want to say he's probably the last one on there, but he's on there. So I went over Ardyn and specifically the entries. So if you had watched that, then you already have seen, you might not remember, but you already saw me go over Ardyn and how he works. So yeah, that's our shameless plug there, is that you can check that video out as well, to see not just Ardyn, but literally every other card they decided, hey, we got to make an entry about that. So that's what time it is. But now we move on to question number 4. Question number 4 is, if I, while having 0 crystals, played Cyan, paying for 4 crystals, and my opponent put Ifrit 16's Spitflare on the stack, targeting Cyan, would Spitflare break Cyan before I gain the crystals, preventing me from using Cyan's abilities in response? Alright, so our situation here. The opponent controls Ifrit. We're casting Cyan, and he has an auto ability. It says when Cyan enters the field, you may pay X CP. When you do so, gain a crystal for each CP paid as X. The maximum you can pay for X is 5. So in a vacuum, just talking about Cyan, he's got one of these when you do so auto abilities. And we know that when you do so auto abilities are, there's an initial auto ability, and when that resolves, it generates a second auto ability that then gets put on the stack and has to resolve separately. So here, all that's happening with the initial auto ability is that when it goes on the stack, it just, well, actually, honestly, just goes on the stack and there's nothing else. But when it resolves, we pay X. And in the question being asked here, we're paying 4. So we pay 4, and then we get the when you do so, which is a new auto ability that's now generated, goes on the stack. And when it goes on the stack, nothing happens. But when that auto ability, the when you do so, resolves, we're going to gain 4 crystals because we paid 4 CP. So what the opponent did here is we played Cyan, auto ability went on the stack, we paid 4, generated the second auto ability, that went on the stack, and then before that when you do so resolved, what they did is the opponent used the Spitflare special on Ifrit, which just says choose a forward and deal it 10,000 damage, and they chose Cyan, and they said, you know what, we're just going to nuke Cyan. And so the person here is asking, well, hold on, am I going to get the crystals before the Spitflare just wrecks Cyan? Which is important because if you look at Cyan, he's got a full-on buffet of options of how to use crystals here, right? 3 different action abilities that use crystals. So the person who played Cyan is very, very much hoping that those 4 crystals are available to them before the Spitflare roasts Cyan. The bad news here is that they are not going to have access to those 4 crystals because those 4 crystals are not going to be gained until that when you do so auto ability resolves. Because as a reminder, when an auto ability goes on the stack, there's only 4 different types of things that happen when an auto ability goes on the stack. There is selecting for multiple actions, there is choosing targets, there's assigning effects to different targets, and there's assigning values. Those are the 4 things that happen when an auto ability goes on the stack. Anything else other than those 4 types of things happens when it resolves. And in this case, one of those things that is not one of those 4 is gaining crystals. So that means those crystals will be sitting there on the stack waiting to be gained, and then Ifrit just Spitflares. Cyan is now turned into ash, and then after that happens, now we resolve Cyan's auto ability and we gain 4 crystals, and hopefully you have something you can do with those 4 crystals because Cyan sure ain't doing it. So yep, sorry to say, but it's a good counterplay by the Ifrit player. Next question about the Emperor. It says, is warp an ability? I believe it's considered a field ability in the rules, but I'm unclear if Warping Emperor still triggers his text. I imagine it does, otherwise it's a useless card. But in the past, I think I remember distinctions between field, auto, and action abilities. I don't think I've answered a question about Warp before, so this will be kind of a good one to cover here. But looking at the Emperor, he has Warp. It's Warp 2 for 2 CP of any element, and then he has an auto ability that says, when the Emperor enters the field due to an ability, select one of the 2 following actions. Remove all the cards in your opponent's break zone from the game, and choose one forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. What the effect does here doesn't matter for this question. All we need to know about this for the question is the fact that he's got Warp, and that his ability says when the Emperor enters the field due to an ability, then you get to select one. Because if he enters the field not due to an ability, that doesn't trigger, because it's it's just written there. So you don't have the trigger event if he's entering the field from something other than ability. So Warp, the question here, they say, is it an ability? The answer is yes, it's an ability. It's actually multiple abilities. So Warp is actually 3 abilities in one, believe it or not. Warp is a field ability and then 2 auto abilities, all wrapped up in one. It's like the BLT of keywords here. But I guess since there's 2 different auto abilities, maybe it's a BTT. I don't know. The auto abilities are different though, so maybe they're just lettuce and tomato. They're closer to each other than they are to the bacon, I guess. I don't know. My analogy's gone off the rails. But anyway, the BLT of abilities here. So Warp is 3 abilities. The first one is a field ability, and the field ability says that when this card is in your hand, you can pay the Warp cost to remove that card from the game and put the amount of Warp counters on it that the ability says. So the field ability part of this says, Emperor's in your hand, you can pay 2 to remove Emperor from the game and put 2 Warp counters on him. The first auto ability out of 2 that Warp has is at the beginning of your main phase 1. If the Emperor has a Warp counter on him, you remove 1 Warp counter. So every time we swing back to your main phase 1, one of those auto abilities triggers and it says, cool, remove a Warp counter, but only if we had one in the first place. And the second auto ability says when the final Warp counter is removed from the Emperor, or just from whatever character has Warp, when the final Warp counter is removed, assuming that the card is removed from the game while this is happening, play that character to the field. So when you remove that last Warp counter, you've triggered a new auto ability that says play this to the field, and then that's how we finish the cycle here from warping to being played to the field. So because of that, all of that process was all abilities, including that second auto ability that says play the Emperor to the field. So yeah, he is not useless because his own Warp ability will make sure that when he enters via Warp, that he will trigger his own auto ability there to do one of those 2 things. Though I will defend that even if he didn't do it off of his own Warp, or even if you weren't warping him, not totally useless, because you could also play him off of any other thing that plays him as an ability. You could play him off of breaking Star Sybil and he'll get his auto ability. You could play him off of Al Cid and he'll get his auto ability. He could be a hit off of Karen and you'll get the auto ability. So there's a bunch of different ways you can get it even without Warp, but the Warp is the built-in way there to do it. So yeah, little discussion into Warp and how Warp works there. But yeah, Warp, the BLT of keywords. That brings us to our last question, and oh boy, this question it's a doozy. So strap in. If you pause this, if you need to, go get yourself a drink and a snack, because we're gonna dive into this. You can see all the text already. I do need to point out, we're talking about lightning, right? You see lightning right over here. So we got lightning and we got Cu Sith. And if you've been watching this, I mean, Rules Roundup. If you've been watching Rules Roundup for a while, you know a lot about how lightning works, because there's been a lot of questions about her. But because we're talking about lightning, you know what time it is. Oh, you thought we had just one time? Just one time this episode? Oh, no. We got more than one time because it is shameless plug time again. Shameless plug time again. Can you believe it? We're back already to the shameless plugging because I did a video all about this lightning called Let's Talk About Lightning. Right? So even if you hadn't watched Rules Roundup, bam, right there, you would know all about how lightning works. Because I covered her and a lot of crazy stuff about her ability there. But yeah, so we're back to shameless plug time, and now it's time to move back out of shameless plug time and actually answer the question. So the question here, I'll read it first. It says, I tried to figure out on my own, but I am unsure on the interaction. I cast Cu Sith in response to Lightning's auto ability during its attack declaration. My opponent plays Serah dull, attacking and forming a party, all the good stuff. After all that is resolved, my opponent uses Serah's action ability the next time they have priority during my block declaration. 151191 says that, quote, to form a party means to attack with 2 or more forwards as if they were a single forward, end quote. And since Serah is in a party attacking with lightning, does Cu Sith's effect negate the 1 damage from Serah as well, or does Serah skirt around it because of 15119110? Or does it not matter at all since I targeted lightning originally? If the party attack manages to get through, how about the player damage done from the attack itself? So we have a couple different questions in here. Very nuanced, very complicated question, but really, actually, we're going to tackle 2 different things here. So if you haven't been watching Rules Roundup and you haven't watched the Lightning video, all you need to know is that Lightning's auto ability it plays a 13 character to the field, and now it's partied with her, and they're both attacking, right? That's the TLDR. And I don't have Serah up here on the screen, but Serah has the action ability that if you control 3 13 forwards, you can use that action ability and deal 1 point of damage to the opponent. So that's the basics there. But Cu Sith is a card that you probably have maybe not seen. It's not that old of a card. It's only Opus 24. But you probably haven't seen it played, or you don't remember when it was spoiled or something like that. So let's go over what Cu Sith does, because this is central to the whole question. Cu Sith is a summon. It says select one of the 2 following actions. The first one is choose 1 backup you control, remove it from the game, draw 1 card. Spoiler alert, we don't care about that action. Absolutely irrelevant for this question. The second action is choose 1 forward opponent controls. If it deals damage to you or a forward this turn, the damage becomes 0 instead. And that's spicy right there, right? So you're choosing a forward the opponent controls, and then once it resolves, if they deal damage to anything, to you or to a forward, it doesn't even matter if it's your forward. They can't even deal damage to their own forwards anymore, right? Damage becomes 0 instead. So the first question here is, I think it's specifically around Serah, right? They they attacked with lightning, they played Serah to the field, and then they used the action ability. And it sounds like, let's see, it says use action ability the next time they have party during so the attack hasn't actually finished yet, but they just went right into Serah's action ability. I took this out for space because this is a lot of words here, but they did specify that there was a third 13 forward on the field when Serah's using the action ability. So there's no cheating going on there. There's a third 13 forward. They're using the action ability during the block declaration step. And so then in response to the action ability, it's on the stack. They use Cu Sith. They target Serah. And so they want to know first, did they say if they were targeting Serah? Where is, okay. Oh, they targeted lightning. I'm sorry. So at some point in here, they cast lightning in response to the auto ability. Okay. So I lost the details there because there's just so much going on here. So so before they played the Serah, they already had cast Cu Sith on lightning. All right, so let me rewind here just to set the scene a little better. They attacked with lightning. Lightning's auto ability went on the stack. In response to that, they cast Cu Sith, resolved it onto lightning so that lightning would now deal 0 damage this turn. After Cu Sith resolves, they resolve lightning's ability. They play Serah to the field. And then during block declaration, because they have 313 forwards, they use Serah's action ability, put it on the stack, and Serah's action ability would deal 1 point of damage to the opponent. So they're asking, because they are partied, Serah and Lightning here, and because Lightning's damage is reduced to 0 this turn, they want to know, does that affect Serah? And the reason they want to know if it affects Serah is because of that quote. The numbers down here, if you're not familiar, those are section numbers from the comprehensive rules. So they're saying, in the rules it says that they're attacking as if they were a single forward. So if they're like a single forward, does that make it so that Lightning, because Lightning deals 0 and they're like a single forward, does that make Serah not deal damage anymore? That's the easy part of this question, believe it or not. The answer is that Serah will still deal damage. The reason why is that if we get into the way that like credit for damage works in a party, it works like this. When you have forwards that are partied together, if one forward in that party deals damage to the opponent, then credit goes to the entire party dealing damage, in terms of that, like if there's anything that triggers from a party dealing damage, if a single member of that party dealt damage, then it's considered that the party dealt damage. For example, there's the Andoria backup that says when a party you control deals damage to the opponent, draw 1 card. So in this scenario with Lightning and Serah, if Serah uses her action ability and it resolves and deals the point of damage, because Serah is in a party, the party gets credit for that the party dealt damage, and then that will trigger Andoria and you get to draw a card. So it works in that direction, that if a single member of the party deals damage, then the party as a whole gets credit for it. However, what doesn't happen is that if the party deals damage, if the party got credit, it doesn't count as each individual member dealing damage. So if there was a card, if you have some forward that says like, when this forward deals damage to the opponent, do XYZ. If Lightning dealt the damage, if Serah dealt the damage and you had this other forward in the party, it would not count as that other forward dealing the damage. So hopefully that makes sense there, but it's kind of like they individually don't get to claim credit for what the other forward did, but the party as a whole gets to like claim credit for that they dealt damage because of the contributions of individual members. But you don't get to like cross that over and say, oh, because Serah dealt damage, now that means this forward who's just sitting there in the party is counted as dealing damage. It's not how that works there. And so for that reason, even though Lightning's damage has been reduced to 0, it does say that they're attacking as if they were a single forward. It's important to note when you're quoting very specific lines of the comprehensive rules that a lot of times they've broken up the steps of something into multiple entries, and so you can't really take just an entry on its own a lot of times. Like that's literally the beginning of the party attack section, and so it just gives you like the overall concept that they're attacking as if they're a single forward, but there's a lot of nuance in there, especially when it comes to things like first strike or forwards that can't be blocked in certain scenarios. So you don't want to get too literal with thinking about them attacking as if they're a single forward. If you get literal there, then you are going to think, oh yeah, she's not going to deal damage because Lightning has the Cu Sith effect. Okay. Now that solves the Serah thing, right? We know that Serah will still deal damage, and so yeah, it doesn't matter that you because you targeted Lightning, it doesn't matter that Lightning had the effect on her. Serah is not Lightning, and so she will still deal damage. The second half of this, however, it says if the party attack manages to get through, how about the player damage done from the attack itself? All right, so Serah dealt the damage. We resolved that. That all happened. But now we have this party attack happening, and we get to, they don't get blocked, and we get to the point of resolving, of doing damage resolution. And so the question is now, what happens? Because normally Lightning has a replacement effect that says if Lightning forming a party deals damage to your opponent, the damage becomes 2. But we also have this other replacement effect, says if the damage dealt to, if they deal damage to you or a forward, the damage becomes 0. So we have 2 different replacement effects there. And as a just brief reminder, if there's more than one replacement effect for damage, then or for anything, honestly, then the player or the controller of the target being affected by by whatever's happening, they get to decide the order with which to apply the replacement effects. Although in this scenario, it doesn't matter which order you apply it in, you're going to end up with Lightning dealing 0 damage. So the question is, Lightning should definitely not be dealing 2 damage because you have the replacement changing it to 0. But what happens? Does the party deal 0 damage because of the Cu Sith? Does it deal 1 damage because Serah's still in there and she doesn't have a Cu Sith on her? How's that work? Now, as luck would have it, last month I asked a question to Hobby Japan on Twitter. It was not about Cu Sith. It was actually about there's a Shiva summon, 2CP Shiva summon that has the text of choose one forward, dull it and freeze it. If it deals damage to you or forward this turn, the damage becomes 0 instead. So other than the dulling and freezing, its effect is identical to Cu Sith here. And I asked them on Twitter a question about, I said, if Lightning was in a party and she was attacking in a party and she got hit with the Shiva, how much damage would be dealt, right? So I actually was asking more or less this question on Twitter. And when they answered me, they said, oh, it'll be 1 damage. The party deals 1 damage because, the reason they gave was because Lightning's damage becomes 0, so she won't deal damage, but the other member of the party will deal damage. That's the way that they phrased it. The answer there was they said, okay, the other party will deal, or the other member or members of the party will deal damage, so it becomes 1 damage. So that, okay, that's interesting. I'm trying to wrap my brain around why that is. So I asked them a follow-up, and I said, oh, so would it be fair to say that when you have a party attacking and you're trying to determine how much damage the party deals, that the amount of damage dealt is based off of the forward in the party that can deal the most damage, right? Because if we have Lightning and Serah, and Lightning deals 0 damage and Serah deals 1 damage, is that why the answer is 1 damage? Because we're taking which party member can deal the most damage, and out of 0 and 1, the most is 1. So we go, okay, cool, the party deals 1 damage. Like I said, is that a fair explanation? And they went, yeah. So they gave me an answer. They said, okay, yeah. So that's the reason why, is that if you have multiple forwards in a party and they individually would deal different amounts of damage, that you take the highest amount and that's how much damage gets dealt. Which, if there wasn't a Cu Sith here, that would kind of explain Lightning's field ability, because hers doesn't say that the party deals 2 damage. It says that if she forming a party deals damage to your opponent, the damage becomes 2 instead. So it's affecting her own damage, but she is in the party. So you would think, with that answer from Hobby Japan about almost an identical card, it's the same type of effect. Case closed, right? Not quite. Not quite. Because there's a problem here. Even though they answered that way, there is a problem. And if you know the rules pretty well, you might know what this problem is already before I even mention it. So the thing is, there have been other instances in the past where we have multiple forwards in a party that each have their own individual replacement effects on how much damage they deal. And the way it's been ruled in the past and answered on Twitter is that when you have multiple of those replacement effects, that when you're trying to determine how much damage the party deals, you apply all those effects, even though those effects say they only affect that forward. The example I have here, I don't have the cards to show you on the screen, but there's Archangel HM. Says that when he deals damage to the opponent, double the damage instead. There's also the Fire Ice 2CP Caius. He has an auto ability that one of the actions you can choose says when Caius deals damage to your opponent, double the damage instead. So if you were to party Archangel and Caius together, they both have replacement effects that say double the damage instead. And the way it's been ruled in the past is that when they're partied and you're determining how much damage the party deals, that you apply all those replacement effects. And so you would go, okay, well, normally it's 1 damage, and then we're going to apply one of their doubling, so now it's 2 damage, and then we apply the other replacement effect that doubles, and now they've dealt 4 damage, right? So that's the way it's been answered historically. And so that flies in the face of this answer, because the in that case, it says Caius's damage doubles, and it says Archangel's damage doubles. It doesn't say anything about the party. And if we were to apply this same concept that they answered with the Shiva and the Lightning, then what we would be doing instead is going, oh, well, Caius would deal 2 damage, and Archangel would deal 2 damage, and so the highest among those is 2, and so the party deals 2 damage. So we have a problem here. We have a problem, which is that the answer that they gave last month said, yeah, here's how much damage you deal. You deal 1, and here's the reason why. Or at least they confirmed when I asked the reason why. I explained this. Okay, is this the reason? They went, yeah. And so you might think, okay, maybe they just goofed. Maybe they just screwed up now, but like, since the historical thing is that you apply all replacement effects, maybe they just made a mistake. But here's the thing. There's actually a ruling going all the way back to 2017 or 19, something like that, because there's, if you've never seen it, we're going to take the Wayback Machine. There's a Opus 2, I want to say, Begamnon. And Begamnon, he has an ability that says if Begamnon deals damage to your opponent, the damage becomes 0 instead. So he's got this basically effect built in to him that says the damage becomes 0 instead. And so somebody had asked him on Twitter years and years and years ago. They asked, they actually, at that point, they asked Kageyama directly. At that point in time, we weren't tweeting Square. There wasn't, like, we weren't tweeting their account. We were actually tweeting. We were told to tweet Kageyama directly back then. Don't do it now. But there was a question that said, oh, if Begamnon was partied with another forward and they did a party attack, would that party attack still deal damage, even though Begamnon's damage becomes 0? And at the time, their answer was, yes, the party still deals damage because Begamnon doesn't deal damage, but the other forward will. So that's actually the same question, or the same answer that they just gave with the Shiva Lightning question that I asked. Right? So that's also like a historic answer that they've given, but these two things are in opposition to each other. Because you have one ruling that says, oh, base the party damage off of looking at how much damage each forward deals individually and then take the highest. And then you have a separate historical answer that says, apply all the replacement effects and like put them all into one pool and apply it to the party damage, even though it's the effects say that, it's for each individual there, but just pool them all together. So what do we do now? Because we have two conflicting answers. And what I have told people at this point is, because they've answered, the most recent answer they gave was about that Shiva and Lightning question that I asked. If there was a tournament happening today and this situation came up, this exact one that this person is asking right here, my answer would be that the party deals 1 damage, and that would be based off of the answer on Twitter with an almost identical situation. And since that's the most recent thing we have and nothing has overturned that yet, again, if there's a tournament right now, I'd say it's 1 damage. However, I have, since this was asked, replied to the original question and asked for a follow-up to try to find out what the reason is why these two things contradict each other or seem to contradict each other. Maybe there's something we don't understand that makes it so those two things don't contradict each other, but we're trying to get more information. So it's entirely possible they will come back to us and go, oh, nope, we goofed. Actually, Shiva should make it so the whole party deals 0 damage to the player. Or they're going to go, no, that's correct. It still deals 1 damage, but actually this whole thing we've been doing with combining like Caius and Archangel and those things together and then doubling and doubling again, that's been incorrect, and we're going to override that. Or they'll come back with a third explanation and be like, oh, here's the reason why both those things can be true and why they are not the same as each other, and we're not going to change any of those rulings, but here's how you can differentiate between one situation and the next. And this is a perfect example of how rulings in this game and Twitter are just an interesting, fraught landscape, because sometimes you get an answer and it could be days, weeks, months, years later that they go, oh, oops, never mind. actually, forget that. We screwed up. This is the actual ruling now. So, hopefully this isn't too unsatisfying for you, but this is going to be a to be continued because they have not responded to my reply yet. This is going to leave you on a little bit of a cliffhanger here. And the next time I do Rules Roundup, hopefully I'll have an answer from them and I can follow up with you all about that. But as I said, if there was a tournament today happening right now, the way I would rule this question is I would say that the party still deals 1 damage. So the party with Lightning and Serah in it will still deal a point of damage, even though Cu Sith is on Lightning. And yeah, we'll see if that remains the case by the next time I swing back to this. So that is the final question for today. Even though it was only 6 questions, it was 6 very in-depth questions. It was like when you get to like the end of a math test and the last ones are like a full-on paragraph, right? That was kind of what we were tackling here today. So anyway, hopefully, if you stuck along with me this long, hopefully you enjoyed that. And if you're looking to follow me in various places, then you can find me on YouTube, which is probably where you're watching me right now. It's the only place I'm uploading at. So I don't know how you're watching me not on YouTube right now. But my channel is youtube.com/@JudgeJared. As always, likes and subscribes are greatly appreciated. Like this video, subscribe to me. Go watch the not priming. I didn't even talk about priming today. Go watch the lightning video and like that one. Go watch my my FAQ video and go like that one. Go watch the what was the other 2 that I mentioned? The 2 that I put out this week. Go watch the Wolves Den at Nationals video and like that one. Watch the Judge first episode and like that one. Do all that stuff on here. I love getting notifications to say people liked stuff. You can also find me on Facebook, where I'm at facebook.com/JudgeJared. You can like my page there. You can also find me on Twitter, where my handle is JudgeJaredFFTCG, or rather at JudgeJaredFFTCG. So you can find me on Twitter and follow along on the my tweet follow-up and see what happens with good old Cu Sith and Lightning and Serah. And then on Discord, if you want to ask me questions there or reach out to me, my username is JudgeJared and my DMs are open. So yeah, I'm in all those places right there. Thank you so much for watching and for just being part of an awesome audience here. I appreciate you all and everything. And so yeah, just very happy to have you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Judge Jared, and until next time, court is adjourned.